Welcome to a Bible talk from Lower Mountains Anglican Church.
Okay, starting at verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it, and it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit, with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it, according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea, and every living thing with which the water teems, and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw it was good. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done.
They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people, They look like trees walking around. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't even go into the village." Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." And he said this to them, "Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come with power."
Well, there's a question that I suspect sits behind so much of what motivates us in what we do day in and day out. And whilst there are many ways to ask that question, in its simplest form, the question is this: who am I? Who am I? I'm not meaning me. Who am I is the question that we ask that's there. For a person to ask, who am I, we acknowledge at a fundamental level that we matter and that we have a purpose. Who am I in this world? Now, let me ask you to do something. Just to yourself, think to yourself, how would you answer that question? Who am I in this world? What words would you use to describe yourself? I could say turn to the person next to you, but let's hold off on that one for the moment. Who am I in this world? What words would you use to describe yourself? And the reason why that is an important question is because a lot is at stake. Perhaps your own sense of importance is at stake. Why do I matter in the world? Or perhaps your answer will have something to do with what you have accomplished or what you want to accomplish, what I've done in my life or something I want to do in my life. And as such, that becomes the reason why you would ask the question, who am I in the world? Now, it strikes me that there are so many different ways to answer that question. You know, the sports person who wants to be an Olympian, the academic who always wants the scholarship, the business person who always wants the promotion, the girlfriend who always wants to be a wife, or the husband that always wants to be a father, or whatever relationship dynamic that might be. We can define ourselves by our own sense of importance or by what we aim to achieve. For me, to answer, I would say this: I am a son, brother, husband, son-in-law, father, nephew, cousin, friend, godfather to somebody who's here today. I'm Australian, yet equally I hold US and UK citizenship. I am white, middle-aged, tertiary educated, intelligent, professional. I'm male, I'm heterosexual, I'm organised, tidy, apart from a few books. I prefer less than more. I'm Christian. I'm a minister who teaches, who preaches, who writes. I like to watch sport. I wish I could play sport better, more often. I'm generally patient, empathetic, interested, confident, and I love ice cream. Or maybe it's best to say, I am just Ken. Hey, I'm the original action figure, guys. None of you got an action figure after you. There are many, many different ways to describe who I am. And you'll note that I have focused on what I think are the positive aspects, rather than that list of aspects that I wish were not the case. Aging, greying, fattening, deafening, blinding, or perhaps annoying, fixated, opinionated. I'm sure you could come up with a lot more of an expansive list if you wanted to. Just talk to the ministry team. Who am I? Could be answered in so many different ways. And as is our want, we are often concerned about what others think of us, such that we can cultivate our own image before others with the hope that they will see us that way, the way that we most desire. Here is one of the reasons why social media is both a gift and a curse. I can post images and comments which tell the world what I want to be seen. How ironic that we use social media to portray to the world how unique and how individual we want to be, yet we wait for social media to validate our portrayal. What I think is interesting is that we often narrow down the way that we see ourselves, or the way that we want others to see us, to a relatively narrow set of qualities. Is that because we want others to see that quality as most important? Gender and sexuality often sit right in this space. For whatever sexuality someone holds or whatever gender they hold, that becomes so important that that is what we fixate on. That's what we want the whole world to know us by. That's a very, very narrow and small way of considering who a person is. We also might know people who are eager to be known for their intelligence or their vocation or their status or their achievements. And the list could go on and on and on. Perhaps I've hit some of the marks of how you might describe yourself. Well, today we start a quick 2-week series and we look at our identity. 2 weeks is way too short. This topic is way too large, given that it is now the air that we breathe. And of all of the congregations across our church today, this is the congregation that lives with this day in and day out in very, very real ways, since this is the air that is breathed in school. It's what's taught. It's what's all around us. But what we will do over these 2 weeks is set a direction that will give us something to think about. Who am I? Well, the goal of this talk is to help us see that our identity is not first and foremost shaped from within. It's not first and foremost from within, but from without. And when I say without, I mean that our identity should be shaped from outside of ourselves, not from the world all around, but by the one who created us in the first place. And the best bit, to recognize that we find our identity in the way that God sees us. And in fact, in doing that, it works best for us. And at the end of the talk, I'm going to ask you to text yourself something, or write it down if you want. I want to ask you to text yourself something, just one idea that has challenged you to think more deeply about who you are. We've done this before. I want you to be thinking as we go through of all of the things that we possibly say, what's one thing that stood out to you that I could then talk about afterwards? So if you're ready to go with me, let's go back to first principles. Would you turn with me to the very first page of the Bible? Whatever translation, we know it's going to be page number 1, Genesis chapter 1. It'd be very helpful to have that open, check out what it is that I'm saying. It'll help me, it'll help you. And what you see there in Genesis 1 is a compelling picture, and as Ellie read it, we can see that picture. It's well known. It's a compelling picture of what it means to be a human being. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we see that formed as light and dark are separated, as sky and water are separated, and water and land are separated, and plants and trees and vegetation are installed according to their various kinds. The sea creatures and the birds and the beasts are created according to their various kinds. And at each point we see God doing something that he's pleased with and he deems it to be good. There's a structure. And at the end of every day, sits back, looks at what's created, and it is good. And once all of these living creatures, these living beings are created, God creates Adam and Eve. And you can see there in verse 27, chapter 1, verse 27, made in our image and in our likeness. Now, apart from the very intentional structure that sits behind the creation of the world, and apart from, I don't know if you noticed it, the binary forms that happen, everything that happens in creation has a partner. There is always an X and a Y equation that comes together as if everything in creation has a complement. And what you will notice with the creation of humanity is that being made in the image of God distinguishes man and woman from all the creatures. They were created, if you looked at all of those creatures, all of those beings, they were created according to their kinds. Verse 11, verse 21. Verse 25, the creation of those aspects of creation were according to their kinds, according to that nature. But when it came to creating humanity, humanity wasn't according to their kinds, it was according to the image of God. Verse 27. Now, if we pause and think about that for a moment, a couple of things should jump straight out at us. Here's the first one. The significance of humanity, of us, is not based at this point in creation on anything that humanity have achieved. It's not that they have fashioned anything. They haven't built anything. They've not made anything. They've not created anything. They've not earned anything. They've not achieved anything at all. No housing, clothing, language. There's no accomplishment that you can put beside their name. Being made in the image of God is a feature. It is not an achievement. The fact that God has given this status to humanity should be absolutely foundational to who we are, to our dignity, to our equality, to our value before God and before others. And the second thing that could jump out to us is that being made in the image of God should remind us that we are not self-contained. We are not the final reference point in which to attribute value to ourselves. It's not as if the world revolves around me or you. This reality should stop us from thinking too highly of ourselves. But equally, it should prevent us from thinking too lowly of ourselves, for we are made in the image of God. The creation story helps us to find our place in God's world. And it's not a picture of restriction or oppression, as if somebody was going to be my creator, I've just, how oppressive is that? I've got to break out from that one so that I can assert myself and show just how unique I am. It's not oppressive or restrictive. Under God, humanity, verse 28, they're blessed. They are told to go out and multiply. They are told to rule the world, which includes naming rights over the animals and the plants, over all of creation. And yet, as creation then grows, God's hand remains part of everything that is. Every person, every bit of flora, every bit of fauna, everything that is created still is dependent upon God. And that is the case right through to today. And then God looks at all that he's made after his sixth day of creating, and he says it's very good. It is very hard to see how God, being the creator and ruler over all things, is a bad thing when you read the way that our world has been created. So here's the point, my friends. Being made in the image of God is meant to be a blessing. In fact, it sets a template for how we might best understand the world that we live in and how we might best understand ourselves. And it takes some of the pressure off as well. For we don't need to actually show ourselves to be so impressive in the eyes of the world, and we don't need to be so impressive in ourselves that we have to carry the responsibility for all of our successes or maybe all of our failures. For we are made in the image of God. Who am I? I am first and foremost created in the image of God. Who are you? You are first and foremost created in the image of God. And whether we acknowledge or reject God as creator of the world does not change that fact. But there are specific implications that come with this. With God as the creator of the world, He is the one who determines how it works best. Sort of makes sense. You create something, you are the one who probably knows it the best. You create it probably for a particular purpose, and when it meets that purpose, you feel quite satisfied by the fact that it is meeting that purpose. Well, God is the creator of all that we know, and in that sense, He is the one who determines how it works best. This reality does not start from within me. It cannot be determined by the world around me. And to choose a different path, to assume a different starting point, will mean that I base my life on something that is less than divine. Why do that when you've got the divine option? If I base my identity on anything less, my achievements, my relationships, my gender, my bank balance, my sexuality, my intention, my ethnicity, then my identity will be limited to that feature, as if that's the most important thing about me. Quite apart from reducing us to a fairly limited and reductionistic perspective, it sells us very short of what it means to be made and valued as one in the image of God. Let me play devil's advocate for a moment. If I base my identity first and foremost in what I determine, that means that every aspect of my life needs to be carried by that particular identity and marker. It needs to take responsibility for all of the aspects of my life. So, for example, if I ground my identity in my sporting ability, then it needs to hold all of the facets of my life in check. If I ground my identity in my vocation, then that needs to hold all of the other facets of my life in check. If I ground my identity in my sexuality, then again, that needs to hold all of the other facets of my life in check. And if at any point my sporting achievements, my job, my sexuality let me down, then all of the other parts of my life equally come crashing down because it just cannot withstand that weight. In fact, I have a friend whose testimony is exactly that. He lived and breathed AFL football. That's that thing they play. Apparently Swans are going very well at the moment. Is that true? Yeah, okay. So we've got some people that actually know what that code is. So down in Adelaide and Melbourne, apparently it's a really, really big game. And a friend of mine went to Adelaide to play AFL football. It absolutely consumed him. You know, some of us grew up hugging a teddy bear when we went to bed at night. He grew up hugging a football. He was absolutely besotted. He was drafted to the Adelaide Crows. And in his first season, he ruptured his ACL, and in one game, his AFL career was over. Everything about his identity went out in one game, in one kick, in one injury. It was all based on his ability to kick football. There is a danger in finding our identity in anything other than what God has determined, because it just cannot hold that weight. And yet that is the air that we breathe. That is the world that we live in. That is the anxiety that we often feel. We have lost ourselves because we have let the world tell us who we are. Now, I'd love to go into a lot more detail with Genesis 1. Maybe we can put that into a Genesis Bible talk series. We don't have further time to look at that. But let's see what Jesus does with that. For he calls his disciples out of the world and he asks them to follow him. So turn with me to Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8, that was the second reading. And what Mark does is he tells a story of Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. And we are introduced to the one who is not just the image of God, we're introduced to the one who is God himself. And in reading the story of Jesus in the first 8 chapters of Mark's Gospel, we are introduced to someone who can do what only God can do. My goodness, he does some things that would be lovely to be able to do. There are some party tricks in there that just leave us boggling. He can heal the sick. He can feed the hungry, 4,000 or 5,000 of them. He can teach the many. He can calm the storm. He can raise the dead. He can provide for the poor. He can walk on water. There is so much in the first 8 chapters of Mark's Gospel. We can see so much of who this Jesus is, but you look at him and you think that's no mere man. That's got to be someone like God. And he calls his disciples to himself, and what he does is he shows them his true identity. But rather than telling them who he is, he asks them. Imagine hearing this question. Jesus calls them together and he says, "Who do people say that I am?" Can you ask him? Don't ask me. Who do people say that I am? And no one says, "Well, you're God." But they refer to the prophets, John the Baptist, Elijah, to the other prophets. And so he sharpens the question. Verse 29, he says, "But who do you say I am?" Please ask him. Who do you say I am? Imagine when you walk through the pearly gates or whatever that picture might be. Let's just assume it's Peter who's the one that this question is asked about. And he's the one standing on the front of the pearly gates, and you get there and then you get to meet Jesus and he says, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter answers, "Well, you are the Messiah." Now, to call Jesus the Messiah is to recognize that he is the one that is sent from God to rescue his people. It's not language we really use today, but it is certainly language that those who were from the Jewish nation of the day would have known, because that is what their hope was, that somebody would come to rescue Israel, the Jews, and they would call him God's king, his Messiah. But Jesus doesn't identify himself that way. He focuses upon something else, because you can see how he answers. Verse 31, he says, "The Son of Man." He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things. If there was something special about being created in the image of God, friends, there is something extraordinary about Jesus, the Son of God, identifying himself not as God, but as the Son of Man. In Jesus, we have one who knows himself to be God, yet identifies himself as one who comes as a man to save. And what is even better is that he comes to save not by overthrowing the world like the traditional view of a Messiah would be, but by being overthrown by the world. He loses his life for those he has come to save. Talk about turning the world upside down. And 3 times in the chapters that you have before us, from chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10, 3 times in these chapters, Jesus will tell his disciples that the Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, be killed, and after 3 days rise again. 3 times he will say it. Now, I'd like to ask you to do something. I'd like you to put yourself into the shoes of the disciples. Let's narrow it just to Peter. Put yourself into the shoes of perhaps the disciple Peter. He was a Jewish fisherman. If that was his worldly identity, what's on his business card? Jewish fisherman. I catch fish so you can eat them. He left his vocation. He stepped away from his family to follow this one he understood to be the Messiah. And he was now a follower of whom he thought would overthrow the oppressors of the Jewish people, yet this Messiah was now telling them that he would suffer, be rejected, and be killed. What a disappointment. This was not the kind of Messiah that Peter had signed up for, to follow. I mean, it would only make him look foolish. Who would follow a lost cause? And so Peter rebukes Jesus. But yet, only one verse later, verse 33, he is put immediately into his place. Peter, you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Now, friends, I want you to think about that, because I think that's the rebuke that we perhaps should hear today. I think what Peter hears here is perhaps what we should hear. So often we put our human concerns before that of God. Let me put that another way. We find meaning and significance either in what we feel or what we want, as if that's the end goal. That's the most important thing. I feel this, therefore it must be right. Or I want this, therefore I should have it. That must be right. Or we find meaning and significance in what the world all around us says is right. If that's what they're on about, then I must be on about that one, and I'm still going to be an individual. If we shape our identity according to our feelings, if we shape our identity to what the world says is right rather than what God says is most important, then we can so very easily get lost. And here what we see the Lord doing is put his people before all else. He lays down his life so that his people might have life, so that they might be able to find their true identity in him. And so Jesus calls the crowd to himself and he teaches them how to find their identity in him. And he says, first, you need to lose yourself. First thing, most important thing, you need to lose yourself. Look at chapter 8, verse 34. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny himself, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. If there was ever a statement in the Bible that spoke directly against what our world says right now, it is this one. You be you. Be true to yourself. You've got this. You can be anything you set your heart or mind on. They are all statements that locate that significance within, and they are the exact opposite to what Jesus calls his disciples to do here. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, for they have determined that they are their own Messiah. Your value, success, importance will need to be determined by what you and only you can do for yourself. No wonder we are anxious. No wonder we are burdened. No wonder we are stressed out of our brains. Because we are carrying a responsibility that is way above our pay grade. And we have taken that all ourselves. But Jesus says there's a better way. And it's to imitate what he has done. Whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Now notice here, he's not saying lose your life for any reason at all, but specifically for Jesus and for his good news, for his gospel. He is saying, find your identity in me. Lose yourself in me, for I will give you life. A reliable and robust self-identity will not come from looking within. It will come by looking at Christ. A reliable and robust self-identity will not come from looking to the world for approval. It will come by looking at Christ. For he is the author of creation, and he became one of us so that we might not be lost to the world. So let's think about the take-home message. Who are you? Who do you want to be? For some here, your identity is shaped by how you feel. There is comfort for you in knowing that before you felt anything, you were created in God's image and you have value regardless of how you feel. For some here, your identity is shaped most by what you think others think about you, or what you want others to think about you. You know, and as great as it is that others might think about you every so often, you are first and foremost known and loved by God. And so I want to say, rest easy in what He thinks of you before you rest uncomfortably in what everyone else thinks about you. For some here, your identity is shaped most by your ambitions, what you hope to achieve in the days that lie before you. And I hope that there are many days that lie before us. To you, I say, go strong, play hard, but take a moment to think about whether what you want is also what God wants for you. For if not, make a change before you get too disappointed. And for some here, your identity is shaped most by your past. Perhaps your achievements in the past, or perhaps your failures. And to you I say, the Son of Man came for you, so that He might know how to step into your shoes to both wipe the slate clean and to help you find a purpose in life that will matter into eternity. And He says, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. For to lose yourself and for me and for the gospel is what it means to be saved. There is your true identity. So I said I was going to ask you right up front to text yourself or to write something down. Now's that time. Pull out your phones, grab a pen, bit of paper, find something to scribble on, forehead of the person next to you. Don't mind. Find something to write on. What is one idea that has challenged you to think more deeply about who you are? Write it down, text it down. I'm going to give you a moment. Text it yourself. And if you're willing, text that message onto a friend at church. Perhaps with an opening sentence. This is what I've been thinking about from the Bible talk tonight. Or make that the first conversation you have over dinner. Let's pray. Jesus called the crowd along with His disciples and He said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it." Lord and Father, help us to find our identity in You. Help us to follow in Your footsteps, to know that You came as God to be man, so that You might step into our shoes. You denied Yourself, took up Your cross. And Father, we thank You that it's because that Jesus has done that, that we might have life. Help us to lose our life for Him, so that He might save us. Amen.
You have been listening to a Bible talk from Lower Mountains Anglican Church. If you'd like to know more about Jesus, get further information, or download other resources, please visit our website at lmap.org.au.